in studio, and go ahead and get in that fall state of mind and plan a cool weathered Mississippi staycation or vacation over at visitmississippi.org. And when I saw the headline that read NASA Engineer Realizes Personal Space Dreams at Stennis Space Center, you know I was all over it. So joining us today on Good Things is Miss Nyla Trumbach. She is an engineer up to some great things there at Stennis. Welcome, Nyla.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I love this conversation. I love women in STEM, women in space exploration, whichever sort of piece of the puzzle that they fit in, and sort of sharing these stories of how you can have a piece of that sort of space pie, however that may look. That analogy got out of hand, but you get what I'm trying to say there, Nyla. So where were you first inspired by space exploration? I read a great story about you being 13 and at your grandparents'.
Yes. So years after my grandfather passed away, my grandmother married a man named Jack Klein, and he was our Papa Jack. And he worked for the space program in the 80s. So he took my mama and he moved her all over the country. They lived in Denver, Colorado. They lived in Huntsville, Alabama. And finally, they moved to Cocoa Beach, Florida, near Kennedy Space Center. And so my family, we would vacation wherever they went. And so we were there one summer, and I was about 13, and I can remember standing in their backyard and watching the shuttle launch. And even though we weren't that close to it, it was still so loud, and you could hear the windows rattling. So just seeing that and how powerful the rocket was, and knowing that there were people on there going into space, that's my first big memory, of space.
And I would imagine, Nyla, at 13, you didn't necessarily think that you'd be breaking barriers at Stennis Space Center, later on in life. There had to be a slow progression of you sort of working your way into actually working up the ladder there at Stennis. You started with engineering. So what was it about engineering as a degree or as a career that sort of, got your attention?
Well, with engineering, I was good at math and science, and I enjoyed it. And one thing about engineering school, most engineering fields, you can go to school for 4 or 5 years, and right out of school, you can get a great paying job usually. And back then, the job market was really good for engineering.
Well, that would be a good reason to go into it. And I know specifically, I think a teacher encouraged you. Even now we're still talking about encouraging young girls or young women into taking opportunities in STEM, thinking outside the box of what, they're capable of doing in terms of career fields. So even back then, and I don't want to say way back in your day or necessarily, Nyla, but a couple of decades ago, there was even less women going into the engineering arena. So who encouraged you or gave you the boost to do that?
Yes, definitely. Back then, there were fewer women in my college classes. But yeah, my high school trigonometry and pre-calculus teacher, Mr. Pat Druitt, sat me down one day and he said, you're pretty good at this math stuff. Have you considered engineering school? And that's kind of where it started, the ideas of going to engineering school. But I also want to mention that my parents encouraged me from a very young age to work hard in school, and my mama especially. She always told me I could be anything I wanted to be if I put my mind to it. And, she wanted to make sure that I could take care of myself, and I could even take care of my family one day if I needed to. So there was never any question of whether I was going to college or not. Neither of my parents were able to go to college, so that was a big deal for me, and it was just a big goal I had growing up.
So when you chose engineering as your degree of choice or career of choice, Nyla, did you have your eyes set on somehow finding your way into the space program, or was it just, hey, this is cool, I'm going to get a good job and sort of see where it takes me? How did that happen?
So I actually didn't know what I was going to do starting out, and I changed my major a few times. I started out chemical engineering and went to geological engineering, and finally settled on general engineering, and I had plans to go to medical school or veterinary school, but after 4 years of college, I think it actually ended up being 4.5, I was ready to get out and get a job and start making my own money. So looking back and considering what I do now, I would have been better off getting a more specialized degree, probably mechanical engineering degree.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, Nyla, especially when we get, into our careers, and you just never know where opportunities will sort of take you. I think that's a good reminder for anyone listening to Good Things. Don't put yourself in a bubble, and just because you don't have the degree that's on the paper for it doesn't mean that you hadn't gotten the experience through other, job sites or on-site training, or can't learn from it. Now, here on Good Things, we always talk about Stennis being a best-kept secret of Mississippi. I'm a bona fide space nerd. I love everything that goes on there at Stennis and beyond. But you're from Poplarville, so Stennis isn't very far. So what was it like growing up knowing that all of that sort of space fun was happening, here in Mississippi?
Well, this is going to sound terrible, but I really did not hear much about Stennis growing up. My mom and my aunt had worked out here. I think they worked for the security group and out at the ammunition plant. But I never really heard much about the space things, or at least I can't remember that. So I do think we do a much better job of that now with outreach. We have show firings sometimes where we invite the public to come out, and we have activities for kids, and now there's the Infinity Center right outside the gates. And I've tried to participate in a few career fairs at my high school, my old high school, Poplarville High School.
So how did you find yourself working alongside maybe your mom and some of your other relatives on the other side of the Stennis part, the actual testing of the rockets, or using your engineer know-how?
Well, my first job out at Stennis was with a small contractor, a Navy contractor called High Performance Solutions, and we maintain the power systems for NAVO, the Naval Oceanographic Office. We took care of and operated the backup generators and battery banks, so when they lose power, those things had to be ready to run. I was one of the first employees with that company, and so I had a lot of responsibility. It was hard for me at first, straight out of school, but it was a good opportunity and good for me to go through that. And after Hurricane Katrina, we were out here providing power for the NAVO supercomputers. So that was a really cool thing to be involved in.
Would any of that have also been used after Hurricane Ida? I mean, you sort of lay the foundation work or the framework for some of that stuff after something like Hurricane Katrina comes that can then be used, if other natural disasters. Did you see some of your work get put into action in the last couple of weeks?
I'm sure the same generators, that were running back then, some of that's probably been upgraded and running for the NAVO. But, out on the test stand, we also have some hurricane preparation type things that we do, and we have to be ready to respond if anything goes wrong out at the test stands during the storm or afterwards.
I would assume that testing the rocket engine probably wouldn't be top priority if there was a hurricane headed to land.
Well, that's exactly right, and we're actually having a few problems right now getting some of the things we need to run a test. So the Ida did impact us here at Stennis Space Center, even though the exact area wasn't hit directly.
I feel like a lot of us feel that way in terms of Ida, as well as still, with Hurricane Katrina. So you were also one of the first females there, first employees, not first employees, but first females to conduct a J2X powerpack engine test. That is a mouthful, Nyla, for me to say, which I think is super cool. And I want to unpack all of that and how you got that opportunity to be able to test that. But let's just start with what is a J2X powerpack test, and we'll dive into that, Nyla, and more coming up next here on Good Things. Good Things Plains wants to remind you that there's an adventure in Mississippi awaiting you. Go to visitmississippi.org to find out more. If you were watching over at supertalk.fm/watch, you would see that I was doing the motions for the rocket launch. Here we go. Yes, I'm a space nerd, and it's okay, but sadly, I don't get paid to be smart about space, but our guest does. We're joined by Nyla. She is an engineer there at Stennis Space Center. She broke barriers as the first female to conduct a J2X powerpack engine test there at Stennis. Okay, Nyla, you're going to have to unpack all of this for us. I feel like we do kind of know that Stennis is known for testing the engines that help rockets get, into space. That's a pretty big piece of the machinery, important piece. So what is this specific J2X? And am I saying it right?
Yes, you are. So J2X was an engine that was going to be used on a previous program, Constellation, and the power pack was just a part of that engine. We were running some tests to check out just particular components of that engine.
So what made it special, or what makes it, I guess, hard or difficult to sort of test it? Like, what goes into the testing of it?
Testing it, it's pretty much like any other test. What was special about the J2X Power Pack test is that they were very long duration. So compared to our RS-25 tests now, which are 500-second tests, these J2X Power Pack tests were 1,400, just over 1,400 seconds of testing.
Wow, that seems like a long time. And you'd have to be there to experience it. You think, oh, you're just testing an engine for 500 seconds or 1,400 seconds. But that's an engine that gets you to space. And so if you can feel that testing, in surrounding cities there in Harrison County, whenever y'all do at least the RS-25, I would assume, Nyla, you being up front and center, pushing the red button, because in my mind, that's how simple this test works. It's, it takes a lot out of you. What is a test like in terms of physically being there?
Yeah, so it does take a lot of preparation. It takes a whole team of people to pull off any of these tests. So for every test, we're given what we call a test profile, and our job on the test stand is to operate the facility and provide certain pressures and temperatures and flow rates to the engine. So we usually get started really early on test day. It's about 6 o'clock in the morning, and start setting things up. And we give the engine nitrogen and helium and hydraulics, and then we'll drop propellants, and that's the super cold cryogenics, liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, which is negative 423 degrees Fahrenheit. Once we chill the engine down really well, and when everything looks just right, then, we get to hit auto sequence start and start the engine. And as a test conductor, at least for myself, I get a little anxious and nervous, and so once you hit start, you kind of hold your breath and watch the screens and pray that it lights up and starts. And once it does, you can kind of catch your breath for a minute, but once the engine starts, then you've got other things to do. You've got to be watching the pressures and temperatures and making sure everything is still staying within limits. And, there's more than the test conductor sitting there. There's a group of other engineers who are doing different things, like transferring hydrogen to keep the hydrogen tank filled, and then locks coming from locks barges. There's engineers operating the locks barges to put locks back in the tank so that engine can make it the 500 or 1,450 seconds. So there's a lot going on there. Of course, we have our mechanics, electrical technicians. There's a lot going on. And you mentioned the power of the engines. During the test, the engine goes through different power levels, and here recently we've gone to 111% and sometimes 113%. So you can imagine how much power it takes to lift the rocket off the ground and push it into space And then you think about what that test stand is doing. It has to hold the rocket down. So the test stands are truly an amazing.
Yeah. Do you ever think back, Nyla, when you hit, full sequence start? In my mind, it's just the great red button. And back to the 13-year-old Nyla who felt, the energy from a rocket, but, miles away, couldn't even see it. And now she's standing there in the midst of it, seeing everything else that's going on that makes that actually go, which I know you're not lifting off. Again, the stands there at Stennis are impressive to keep it down, fighting against it, wanting to go. But do you ever just come full circle and think back to that 13-year-old girl?
Yeah, I do. It means a lot to me now, knowing that I was there and never really even expected to do anything like this. So it's great, a great memory. And my grandfather was involved in the space program too, so it is a very special thing. He's given me some of his older photos and different. I have a space shuttle model that he gave me. So yeah.
It's pretty cool. I know you're also a mom, Nyla, so I can't even imagine the work-life balance that you have to create there, which is one reason why many women find themselves not choosing careers like engineering or other things like that, because it's demanding, and it's demanding for a right reason. I mean, I'm not knocking the fact that that's what it takes to get a rocket into space. So how do you work through that? How do you keep the balance with being fully present with such a important position and part of the team there at Stennis Space Center, but then also, filling that role as a mom back at home and making sure you don't miss, the important things there?
It was really hard at first. I was not prepared for what it was going to feel like, what it was going to be like to have these brand new babies, and I want to be with them, the whole time, but I had to be at work. So it's not something that I had thought about. So if I have any advice for girls out there, think about that, what your future plans are. And it doesn't mean that you can't go into engineering, but definitely something to think of, and think of your finances and if you could take more time off. After my first child, I had to come back to work 6 weeks after I had her, because it was a new job after a contract change, and so I had no time, and things were a little different back then. But after my second child, I really found myself struggling. It was hard to make 40 hours. I had that routine of get up in the morning, get the girls ready, get them to daycare, go to work, come home, pick them up, do supper, give them baths, and do it all over again. And while I have tons of help from my parents and my in-laws and my husband, it was still difficult, to feel like I was being a good mom. So thankfully, I have good supervisors and some upper management, and they saw my struggle. And after much prayer and discussion, they were able to work out a flexible alternative schedule for me. And now I feel like I can get it all done. I feel like I'm able to do all the things I wanted to do. I've been able to coach their softball teams, and I've been able to get more involved at church. And I recently started a fit camp class in the mornings, which is so not me, but I'm doing that 3 days a week.
You really are a rocket scientist that does it all. But I love your honesty, and I love the honesty in the answer to that question, because I feel like sometimes just understanding the reality of the situation and then making the best decisions for your family, and learning that sometimes you do have to work, to find that balance, but it can be done with open communication and conversation. And obviously, Nyla, you're putting up the work where Stennis feels like it's good to have you around, and I know your family enjoys that as well. So, what would you say to little girls who are looking for STEM? Go for it, reach for the stars, or what?
Yeah, go for it. Definitely, especially if you're interested in math and science and you like those things, or maybe go ahead and start focusing on those things. And even if engineering is not your thing, there are many other careers in the space industry. We have mechanics out here, and yes, we've had female mechanics. We've had female electrical technicians. We have crane operators and welders, and I mean, there's even accounting that you can go in and still be involved in the space program. So
I'm going to find my fit at some point, Nyla, in the space program. But for now, I enjoy just sharing the conversations and the good stories like yours that's coming out of Stennis Space Center. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you.
All righty, you guys stick with us. We got more for you coming up next.